we're coming back to the idea that imagination is how we open the road to both personal and societal change. We can transform ourselves and our consciousness and our community and our culture and our society if we imagine something different and then act as though that thing exists, because by acting like it exists, you're making it exist. All right, welcome back. I am Peyton, and we are still talking identity and spirituality and reality through Gloria Anzaldúa's book, Light in the Dark, but I'm sort of walking us through the book, so you don't actually have to have read the book. I'm doing that for us. Before we get into chapter 2 of Light in the Dark, though, I wanted to go back to the horse card that I mentioned Gloria Anzaldúa talked about in the forward in 2001 to this bridge called My Back. So I couldn't remember exactly where she mentioned the horse card or like how it came up, but I remembered that that was influential for me, and that was part of why I started doing sort of readings in this podcast and in my work. And so I wanted to go back. I found it, I came prepared, and I want to share that with you so that you sort of understand. I think is really relevant to especially this next chapter that we're about to read. So this is the horse card. If you're looking at the video, here it is. It's number 35 in the deck. It's from the medicine cards deck, and I will have to do a very separate episode talking about this deck specifically because I do think ethically it's got some complications, but I still use it. So I would like to talk about that. So I'm going to read a quote from the forward of This Bridge Called My Back in 2001, and then I'll talk about the description from the medicine card deck and what the horse symbolizes in this deck. So Anzaldúa writes, using imagination, images, feelings, thoughts, love, and vision to implement change is another counsel from the firing. Imagination links us with what lives outside of us. Like radio waves, our thoughts and consciousness travel on air and impact others. Imagination offers resolutions out of the conflict by dreaming alternative ways of imaging, feeling, thinking. For positive social change to happen, we need to envision a different reality, dream new blueprints for it, formulate new strategies for coping in it. But because change, positive and negative, is always a source of tension, because it has no sense of closure, of completion, we resist it. We must be motivated by love in order to undertake change. Love of self, love of people, love of life. Loving gives us the energy and compassion to act in the face of hardship. Loving gives us the motivation to dream the life and work we want. To help me dream this forward, I spread the medicine cards and pulled horse, the power that brings visions. This book is our horse. It carries our messages, our gifts to the people. A spiritual understanding of humanity's role in the universe is now required of us. Before, this radical change in consciousness, this burgeoning of a worldwide spiritual activism, this common cause among the world's peoples, this paradigm shift, was a dream. Now it's a necessity. So now I want to go to the medicine card deck, the booklet that comes with it, and talk about what horse represents in this deck. Mighty horse, power to run across the open plains, or to bring the vision of the shields dancing in purple dream rain. The description says, stealing horses is stealing power was a statement made frequently in historical Native America, and a reference to the esteemed role in which horse played in Native cultures. Humanity made a great leap forward when horse was domesticated, a discovery akin to that of fire. Before horse, humans were earthbound, heavy-laden, and slow creatures indeed. Once humans climbed on horses' back, they were as free and fleet as the wind. They could carry burdens for great distances with ease. Through their special relationship with horse, humans altered their self-concept beyond measure. Horse was the first animal medicine of civilization. Humanity owes an incalculable debt to horse and to the new medicine it brought. It would be a long walk to see one's brother or sister if horse had not welcomed the two-legged rider upon its back. Today we measure the capacity of engines with the term horsepower, a reminder of the days when horse was an honored and highly prized partner with humanity. And then it does keep going. I'm not going to read it, but I think it's really beautiful the way that she's positioning humans' relationship to horse with humans' relationship to writing and to storytelling, to knowledge production, right? Especially considering that this was like an anthology of women of color writers that historically have been silenced. And so, yeah, I find it really beautiful. I really appreciated that she did that with her work. I've been doing it with mine. And I think it fits right in with our discussion of chapter 2, because chapter 2 essentially is about images and symbols. And so chapter 2 of Light in the Dark is called Flights of the Imagination, Reading, Rewriting Realities. And what she's doing is talking about the ways in her life that she has cultivated this like symbology. She's sort of curated her own understanding with the world greater than herself, what certain symbols mean to her and in her life. So she begins chapter 2 with letting us into her relationship with trees. And she says, I've been developing an ongoing relationship with the spirit of trees and nature sites since I was a child. I can alter consciousness in order to communicate with them. And from her relationship with trees, she says, I know that the universe is conscious and that spirit and soul communicate by sending subtle signals to those who pay attention to our surroundings, to animals, to natural forces, and to other people. We receive information from ancestors inhabiting other worlds. We assess that information and learn how to trust that knowing. The mind does not make things up. It just imagines what exists and then tells the soul to remember. And so she asks the tree for inspiration when she writes, which I will say, without having read this beforehand, I also did with my dissertation. So I can attest to like having my own personal journey to a very similar situation. And then when I studied at the Arthur Findlay College, that is also part of what they taught us. And I went there not knowing what the fuck I was doing there, to be honest. Loved it. Best experience of my life. And like, I didn't know I had spiritual gifts. I didn't know anyone was capable of having spiritual gifts. I think I went there believing in it, but believing in it outside of me, right? Like, I didn't think I could do it. And so part of what they do when you go there is, at least in like the beginner classes, they teach you how to interpret your own intuition. They teach you how to interpret and like start building this like symbology with whatever you want to call it, the spirit world, the universe, whatever. If I say the universe and it makes more sense in your mind to call it God or something else, do that. But know that it's the same thing. We're talking about like don't let the signifier, the word itself, get in the way of the message that is here. Okay. But for example, I remember watching Tyler Henry, like the Hollywood Medium, and there was one time that he said that like he was seeing Britney Spears. And it's interesting watching that show. Like, I watched that show before I went to the Arthur Findlay College, and then I watched it afterwards. Like, and he's literally walking you through the process. He literally tells people, like, I'm not actually seeing Britney Spears. I'm seeing this image of Britney Spears, and that is my personal communication system with spirit, so that I know the name Britney is relevant. So then like someone is like, oh my gosh, how did you know that my friend Britney died, or whoever, right? And he doesn't necessarily know all those details, but he sees the image of Britney Spears, and then he learns how to trust that in himself. He learns how to decipher, what is this image communicating to me? And then it becomes more and more reliable. And he can say, oh, this just means this, right? And that's what happened. Like, that is the hardest part, I think, of like, once you actually give yourself a chance to like say like, hey, I think I could do this. It is building that repertoire of symbols with the universe, and then which just takes time, right? Unless you're trying to force it, which I don't suggest. And then Anzaldúa, a couple pages later, starts talking about the symbol of the snake. And she's using that sort of the way that I just kind of explained it to you, where she talks about when she was growing up. She says, my imagination made me pregnant with story. I literally ate my grandmother's and mother's stories. Don't go in the water, my mother would say. A snake will crawl into your vagina and make you pregnant. Hers was a cautionary tale so that I wouldn't bare my body like the gringa girls. Don't go out late at night. A snake will enter your vagina. But my mother was really saying, don't go out late at night. A man will rape you. So she's giving like a sort of origin story of how this snake as a symbol came into her life. But then as her life goes on, and as like snakes continue to pop up in her life, whether that's like, she talks about like real, quote unquote, real snakes, like tangible snakes, but also like metaphorical snakes. She doesn't really see them as different. And so she says that now, whether material or imaginal, this animal symbolically represents transformation for me. Encounters where nature, a bird, a tree, the wind, catches my attention and awakens me to another reality, a healing spirituality that calls for soul recovery. I hear the snake warn me, you're leaking energy and parts of your spirit have gone missing. get back the missing pieces of your soul. And in that sense, I think that's where it's super ironic, I think, considering we live in a world dominated by the Abrahamic religions, that we take everything so literally, right? Like there are people that would say, the snake is not telling you that. And verbally, no, that's not what's happening, right? But something that comes to mind here is actually, there's a book called Course in General Linguistics by Ferdinand de Saussure, and that was published in 1916. And what he talks about is he gets into the like logistics and foundations of language. So for example, he talks about the signifier and the signified and how the correlation, he says, is arbitrary. It's a social agreement. I'm going to get into that. So when I say the word tree, the sound and the graphic image of like TREE, those letters combined, that is the signifier. That's how you know what's being communicated. And then the signified is the actual concept of a tree, right? But the thing is, like when I say the word tree, you're going to imagine something very different than what I imagine, right? If I say the word love and you're going through a breakup and someone else is like in a budding romance, you're going to have very different interpretations of what that word means, right? And if that happens with like basic language, which it does, imagine like when we start to get more abstract, like of course that's going to change what's happening. But part of what Saussure is arguing is that it is arbitrary, right? There's nothing inherent about the letters TREE that correlates to the concept of a tree, that the living being outside my window right here. That is arbitrary. However, it is a social agreement, right? We have agreed upon it. And what Anzaldúa is saying is that you can create your own signifier signified social agreement situation with the spirit world, with the universe. And so the word snake means something very different to Anzaldúa than it does to me, for example, and I'm assuming to you. And that's what she's saying is like how the universe and how her guides, her ancestors, like these otherworldly forces communicate with her. And then she returns to that word Nepantla. Remember, that is the between worlds. This is a quote now. She writes, perceiving something from two different angles creates a split in awareness that can lead to the ability to control perception, to balance contemporary society's worldview with the non-ordinary worldview, and to move between them to a space that simultaneously exists and does not exist. I call entering this realm Nepantla, the Nahuatl word for an in-between space, a lugar entre medio. Nepantla, an indigenous word, is a concept that refers to a place without place. I translated that, but that's essentially what she's saying. She says Nepantla is the bridge between the material and the immaterial, the point of contact and the place between ordinary and spirit realities. And essentially, she's saying Nepantla is where transformation takes place, right? Transformation happens or rebirth occurs during visionary states of consciousness that she's calling Nepantla. So she says the process of falling apart or of being wounded is a sort of shamanic initiatory dismemberment that gives suffering a spiritual and soulful value. So what she's saying is that when we're faced with the challenge in our personal lives, that is an opportunity, right? And it's a shitty one, sure, but like it's an opportunity to learn both spiritually and like soulfully is what she's saying. And part of what she's doing is actually really resonant with the work that she began with Borderlands, because what she's saying is that like when you are a spiritual person that is, you know, occupying Nepantla in this in-between space, part of your job is to sort of reject the way that Western knowledge and Westerners love to create opposites, right? To define the world by opposites. So she says, as Westerners would like to think, seeking good without evil, pleasure without pain, God without the devil, love without hate. But she says the shaman stands at the juncture of opposing forces and moves between them. So it's seeing these quote unquote oppositional forces that aren't actually oppositional at all. That's what she's saying is the work of the shaman. I would say more broadly, that is the work of like a spiritual person, someone who is serious about their spiritual journey. And then she does start to define shamanism or chamanismo. She says chamanaria is an animistic system, a nature religion, a system of healing and a personal, private spiritual practice that focuses on our daily lives, the work, people, places, emotions, and individual experiences that compose our existence. And she says that when shamans go on this inner journey, they break through a plane of reality and find their allies within the unconscious realm. So the angel, spirit guides, whatever, however you want to say that, right? Ancestors, whatever it is. And she says that when they are in this unconscious realm, they have encounters with ancestors or mythical archetypes, and they wrestle with the demonic forces of the subconscious and the negative characteristics of the psyche. And she calls this an ego death and spiritual rebirth sequence. She says that the journey of a shaman is a sort of dying where the shaman has integrated her knowledge of the separate reality into her normal faculties of perception, which incorporates this wider vision. And this is where she starts to sort of bridge the work of shamans with the work of creatives. She says the creative process is an agency of transformation. Using the creative process to heal or restructure the images or stories that shape a person's consciousness is a more effective way of healing. And I'm thinking of The Body Keeps the Score in one of the final chapters when Vanderkolk talks about how for survivors with severe PTSD or CPTSD, like all of these veterans with intense trauma who have gone through all of this different talk therapy for years, found so much more healing in like when they joined like an improv or like acting scenario. I don't remember exactly what it was. You'd have to look into it yourself, but like these people with this complex trauma go into these improv sessions and like get to embody a different personhood, a different narrative. And I remember part of what the process for their healing was to sort of recreate the conditions of their trauma, but then allow them the space to, act differently, to play out that story differently, and for their brains to get a different story surrounding the conditions of their trauma. That was so healing. You're embodying the healing process. It's not just that you're, revisiting these painful memories and talking about them and talking about them and talking about them. You're actively doing something different with them. And I think that's a little bit what she's talking about here. And then she moves into a discussion about interpreting symbols. And I think that this really resonates with the way that I have learned to read tarot. She says, start with any image, contemplate it, carefully observe how the picture begins to unfold. Don't force it, just observe. And sooner or later, the picture will change through a spontaneous association that causes a slight alteration. Note all of these changes. Step into the picture yourself. If it's a speaking figure, talk to it and listen to what they have to say. So for example, if you're watching the podcast and not just listening, you're going to see on your screen right now the 6 of Pentacles or wheels. This deck calls them wheels, but it's the same thing, Pentacles. The 6 of Pentacles typically represents some sort of generosities, moving out of struggle and into where help is available. So in terms of like the grand storyline of the tarot deck, I think the word, the signifier, is what signals to me that's where we're at in the story. However, the actual art on whatever deck you get is going to be different, right? And so there are times that I look at this card and I feel like I'm looking at it from the perspective of the child. And there are other times that I feel like I am being the generous one. I am the one that's giving. I am the mother figure. And that depends on what deck you have, right? The 6 of Pentacles, there's not one way to read it. There's a traditional sort of association that went with the original card, but part of the beauty of tarot is that it is up to the reader's interpretation. So as a reader, it is good to have the like knowledge of where that card falls in the deck and what historically and traditionally it represents. And that cannot carry your readings. You have to tap into the imagery of it and let it unfold. Trust that like whatever comes to your mind is relevant. It is up to you to figure out how to like do that work of understanding how. But part of what tarot is, and also what mediumship is, what really all of the psychic sciences are, is taking seriously those things that pop into your head and then deciphering, like practicing. That takes practice. That's not like I'm not saying that if you've never studied the psychic sciences, you get to just make up whatever the fuck you want because it came into your head. That's not what this is. The psychic sciences, you're developing your own sort of scientific technique of understanding what these images are communicating to you. And a lot of times, like depending on how the reading is working, it's collaborative, right? You're receiving your images and then you're kind of speaking about them. And whoever is being read is able to then also interpret whatever is coming up in their mind. And then through that, you can come into a reading that actually makes sense and feels good for the both of you, right? Because sometimes, even when I am not the one being read, it is healing to me to know that like these cards are helping someone. This message is helping someone, and I'm just part of the process. I never take credit for any of the like messages that I give to anyone. That's never how I feel. I always feel very much like this was figured out collaboratively with the information that came to mind for you and the information that came to mind for me, and with the help of our guides, our spirit teams, our angels. And here's where I want to come back to Anzaldúa, because she has this beautiful quote. She says, "The I is only one of the many members, imaginal figures that compose a psyche. Other imaginal figures wander in and out, within and without a person, all with lives of their own. I am not in charge of my images." She's using air quotes with like I and my. "Images have lives of their own and walk around as they choose, not as I choose. Nor do I create these images. They emerge from my personal psyche. Although contemporary theories of identity leave out our innermost spiritual core identity, I'm interested in the connective membrane between the interiority and the exteriority of subjectivity." Beautiful. Okay, what's she saying here? She's saying that, like, the things that pop into your head, don't take so much credit. That's not all you. She's saying some of these images, they live on their own. All of these memories that you pull from, whether it's like a short little memory or like a whole situation that comes to mind when you're doing some sort of reading or doing some sort of, I don't know, whatever it is. I'm talking about reading because that's what I do, but you could apply this to any spiritual practice. But this is kind of a call to be a little bit more humble in terms of like how much ownership you have over your own ideas, rather than seeing them as part of this like greater process that you are just a part of. And also that the things that I have experienced, that's not something we can rewrite either, right? Part of what she's breaking with this book, and really all of her work, is the notion of binaries, of thinking like it has to be this or it has to be that, right? She's saying, why do we always do that? Why does like Western, the way that we categorize our knowledge, always has to be this like oppositional thinking, this binary thinking? You're gay, you're straight, you're black, you're white, you're neurodivergent, or you're neurotypical, whatever, however you want to talk about it. Like we categorize the world in the Western world by what things are not, right? And to some degree, it seems like it would be easier to do. And also, we've got ourselves into a ton of shit this way. And so what Anzaldúa is saying is like, we've got to break out of this way of thinking. And that's where she starts talking about this idea of imagination. What is imagination? Is imagination real or is it not real? She says to explore this sort of topic, we must redefine the imagination not as a marginal non-reality, nor as an altered state, but rather as another type of reality. And then she says we must avoid the snares of literalism. Are spirits literally present, or are they just imaginally present? They are both. Science denies reality to fantasy because scientific belief sees only the literal as real. Neither the conscious world's literal reality nor the unconscious world's non-literal reality is absolutely real. Okay, well, that was a lot, right? She's saying the things, the material world, the literal world that we live in, we know is constructed, and also the unconscious, the subconscious world that we have going on absolutely affects our corporeal material reality, right? And when she's talking about spirits and whether spirits are real or not, she references anthropologist Edith Turner and calls this view intellectual imperialism. She says, according to Turner, spirits are manifestations that constitute the deliberate visitation of discernible forms that have the conscious intent to communicate, to claim importance in our lives. And then she immediately quotes another developmental psychologist, Mary Watkins, and says, there is another force influencing our thoughts, emotions, movements, and actions. One can no longer say it is a god or a spirit. And yet, one has those ancient feelings of possession and movement by a force that does not answer to logic or common space and time, right? So think about like when you logically can talk yourself out of a situation, but like emotionally, you're just not over it. You're just dwelling. That's kind of what I'm thinking about here. There's something else influencing our behaviors, our emotions, our movements, our actions that does not answer to logic. So I think right now there's a lot more research about the nervous system, which again, that does explain what's going on. But without the spiritual element of why, I don't see what is productive about that search, that quest for knowledge. So when she's talking about science and spirituality, she says spirituality is an ontological belief in the existence of things outside the body, exosomatic, as opposed to the belief that the material reality is a projection of mentally created images. The answer to the question, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound if no one is there to hear it, is yes. Spirituality is a symbology system, a philosophy, a worldview, a perspective, and a perception. Spirituality is a different kind and way of knowing. It's a different kind and way. She's not saying it's better than science. She's not saying it's better than other forms of knowledge. She's saying it's a different kind. And there's very much a colonial framework to try to hierarchize which knowledge is most true and which knowledge is, superior. She says academics disqualify spirituality except as anthropological studies done by outsiders, right? You can have white people go study religious tribes and write about what it felt like to be their civilized self, studying these native primitive people. I'm being super facetious here, sorry. But she says spirituality is a turnoff for those exposed to so-called New Agers' use of flaky language and Pollyanna-like sentiments disconnected from the grounded realities of people's lives and struggles. And no wonder. Most contemporary spiritual practitioners in this country ignore the political implications and do not concern themselves with our biggest problem and challenge, racism and other racial abuses. They're not concerned with the violence against children and women, with poverty and the attacks against nature. I describe the activist stance that explores spirituality's social implications as spiritual activism, an activism that is engaged by a diverse group of people with different spiritual practices or spiritual mestizaje. That's like a blending. So she's saying for people who are, doing a more personal approach to not a fan of organized religion, but just considering themselves to be more spiritual and the new age sort of spirituality that she's talking about. Again, she's writing this in the early 2000s. So she hasn't even seen what TikTok has done with some of the terminology of spirituality. But I agree. It's still the fact that most contemporary spiritual practitioners in this country ignore politics. It's such a spiritually bypassy situation, right? Where I don't know, I think there are too many people that don't want to do the work of understanding these very complex forces of racism and colonialism and homophobia and just even the structure of capitalism. There are so many people who just want to make their manifestation TikToks and do not want to talk about how systemic racism has, always affected the wealth gap. And people want to talk about manifesting all of this money so that you can buy this development property and kill all of this nature in order for you to make more money and go to this spa. You know what I mean? I can see where so many academics have been turned off to what people who consider themselves to be spiritual but haven't done that kind of work, the political kind of work, and just leave it out of what they're doing. This is the tension here. And I feel that in my work, right? I remember when I was basically pitching what I thought was going to be my dissertation, there was this Marxist, actually, academic, who told me that my work was too self-helpy. It was too spiritual. It was not academic enough. And did I change my work? No, I didn't. I just removed him from my committee. No shade, but that was just not a good fit. And at the same time, I see my academic friends struggle with very much logic-based either disorders or patterns of thinking, ways of seeing the world, where they're almost so stuck in the logic of it and in the material that there's no consideration for anything spiritual. And so I really appreciate this spiritual activism framework, because I think that if your spirituality is not for the benefit of, the planet at large, and also yes, yourself and your community and the environment surrounding you, I don't know what you're doing, And so again, she's sort of comparing the shaman to the artist, and she says the artist uses the imagination to impose order on chaos. She gives psychic confession form and direction, provides language to distressed and confused people, a language that expresses previously inexpressible psychic states and enables the reader to undergo in an ordered and intelligible form real experiences that would otherwise be chaotic and inexpressible. So what she's saying is that the artist is basically putting into words or putting into whatever like form of art you're doing, the psychic state of something that other people cannot explain, right? They're experiencing it, and yet it's just this chaotic, uncontrollable, inexplicable thing that they're being subjected to. Whereas like the artist transforms that into something that it's not that it's something that's happening to them, but that they're almost part of. I think that when an artist can give psychic confession, as she says, form and direction, which is again like that is what Anzaldúa's work did for me. I was this, Chicana from Michigan. I didn't even know the word Chicana. I was a fucking person from Michigan that was like, my family was telling me I was Tejana. And I was like, I've been to Texas like 3 times, right? Her putting all of her pain and her, difficulties navigating life in the borderlands, she gave that language. She created the language of borderlands, and we still use it, and widely. Borderlands as a theory is widely used in academia. That's like the ironic part. If you keep going with her work, you inevitably end up here. I've said that multiple times now, but academia didn't want to go there, right? So they cut her off at Borderlands, and they didn't really care about anything else she did after that. But she says that creation is a rereading and rewriting of reality, a rearrangement or reordering of pre-existing elements. And she gets into how the creative process is a spiritual process. And I recently did The Artist's Way, and I would say that book also really transformed the way that I think about creativity, and I can't unsee it as this like spiritual thing that you collaborate with the universe or with your guides, with whatever you want to call it. Anzaldúa says creativity is a liberation impulse, an activity that transforms materials and energy. And towards the end of the chapter, she asks some really, complex questions. She says, how real is reality? Does perception determine experience, or does experience determine perception? What comes first, the experience or the ideology framed by language? Does experience/life create reality, or does language/ideology interpret experience and therefore create reality? She says the dominant Western worldview holds that an objective external reality exists independently of the knower, a reality that science can accurately describe. But when she's talking about decolonizing reality, she says knowledge is relative and reality is a composition. You reconstruct yourself and, to a lesser extent, your culture, society, and world by the decisions you make. She says decolonizing reality consists of unlearning consensual reality. So basically, we have to unlearn the shit that we have, inherited, and the way that we have been told this is how the world works. We have to question that, and we have to let go of the stuff that has been, shoved down our throats for the colonial project for, centuries at this point. And she says you must interrupt or suspend the conscious I that reminds you of your history and your beliefs, because these reminders tie you to certain notions of reality and behavior. To invent this new reality, you cultivate a pretend reality and act as though you're already in that pretend reality. So again, we're coming back to the idea that imagination is how we open the road to both personal and societal change. We can transform ourselves and our consciousness and our community and our culture and our society if we imagine something different and then act as though that thing exists, because by acting like it exists, you're making it exist. She says art, reading, and writing are image-making practices that shape and transform what we are able to imagine and perceive. And this is where the danger of AI comes in, because if you are only, thinking and reading and writing and creating things produced by AI, you are limiting. There is a wall on what, like, these billionaires, these massive tech companies give you the illusion that you can do whatever you want with these AI systems, but they have constructs. They also have things that they're not allowed to do or they're not allowed to say, right? And so when you put your creative power and potential into a system that is going to filter out and construct it in a way that aligns with, the overall success of ChatGPT, that is the purpose of AI, is to give you what you want, not to like change your worldview. That is a system that has been shaped by the morals and ethics and values of tech bro billionaires. And so you are still limited as to what you can imagine if you are letting tech bro billionaires imagine it for you. Right? And towards the end of the chapter, she says that this book is attempting to explore the quest for greater consciousness and other dimensions of reality by challenging the basic premises on which our concepts are built. So those concepts of like oppositional, the way that we understand the world in opposition, that's what she's challenging. She's challenging, like, again, the all the way to the root of it, the way that we think about imagination, the way that we think about science, the way that we think about knowledge, right? That's is the level that she's starting to critique what we're doing. And then she basically says that all people who are, tapping into their imagination and to their creative potential are empowered people. But she says that sometimes we fear becoming empowered because every time we take on a challenge and become empowered, our whole life will change. The setting and the people that have disempowered us have to disintegrate because we don't need them anymore. And when she's saying disintegrate, she's saying disintegrate, right? When we talk about learning lessons and then integrating them into our life, she's saying other things have to be disintegrated from our lives. She says, when you learn to access other realities, you undo one description or plane/level of reality and reconstruct another or others. You learn a new language and a new way of viewing the world, and you bring this magical knowledge and apply it to the everyday world. You learn that the world's former description and framework were inadequate. Henceforth, you see the world with two sets of eyes, with dual vision. And that's something that she also says in Borderlands. She says that we have to see through both serpent and eagle eyes, right? And that is very similar here. What she's asking is for us to see beyond the binary, see beyond the way that we've understood the world to be constructed so far. And just before I wrap up this episode, I did pull a card today. It was the Four of Cups. I'm showing it to you if you're on the video version. The Four of Cups typically represents something that the universe is trying to give you, or like something in your subconscious is trying to emerge, or just this level of like ancestors trying to speak to you, however you want to, like, however that makes sense to you. The Four of Cups is when you're avoiding that, or when it's not working because you're so wrapped up in your own head. I would say that, like, I think that this is actually a really cool pull for this podcast specifically, because I think we can read it, I think, a couple of ways, but like, I see this as like, when you're someone who is deeply, analytical about the structures of the world and you really understand them to like a deep capacity, and also you are very spiritual and very optimistic about what this world can be, that can be very isolating, right? But I think when you are very logical and when you are, believing in the power of imagination and creativity, it can sometimes be easy to get stuck in your own head, right? And I'm not saying that imagination or creativity is exclusively coming from like the mind, but I just think that like when you're someone with all of these, I don't want to say conflicting values, but like when you operate, for example, like Anzaldúa, in academia and also in a deeply spiritual sense, sometimes what happens is we get so trapped in our minds and thinking about things and dreaming of things that we aren't in our bodies, right? We're not paying attention to, the tree that's supporting us, the land that's supporting us. And I think sometimes we can get so wrapped up in the work of it. And sometimes it's ego. Sometimes it's like, I don't want people to think I'm crazy for talking about this or whatever, right? There's all sorts of different things excuses that we use. But I think in this particular situation, the emotional fulfillment of all of these ideas that we're thinking about, that comes when you embody it. That comes when you live it, right? You can't just keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. There's got to be some action, right? And at the very least, when it is time to rest, let yourself rest, right? Part of how we let creativity emerge is by surrendering to our minds, right? Letting ourselves not be the ones in control, right? And so I got a tree right outside my window. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to go sit outside with my tree, and I'll see you next time.